Okay, so we had our last oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even say an introduction. I just started talking. How rude. Hi, my little animalcules. So we're going to talk a little bit about population pyramids. I think these are probably things that you've seen, and then we're going to pair them with the demographic transition model that we talked about last video. So the demographic transition model just shows us how a population is going to change over time. So if you recall, in stage one, birth rates and death rates are both really high, so the total population is low. And then, due to access to healthcare, medicine, and education, the death rate begins to fall, but the birth rate stays high. That causes the total population to begin to increase. As cultural norms shift and education shifts, then birth rates begin to decline as well, and we see that here. And so the population is still growing, but at not nearly as fast of a rate. Note that the slope of the line in stage two is a lot higher than the slope of the line in stage three. And then in stage four, it should even out. Birth rates and death rates are really the same. They're both low. And then we talked about how in some countries like Japan, the birth rate even falls so low that the birth rate is below the death rate, and so our population will begin to decline. So for each of these stages, we can associate a population pyramid. So population pyramid tells us what percentage of the population is found in each cohort or in each age group. So these are just outlines. You'll probably see more expansive ones in our activity. But so if we look at this, right, so red is pre-reproductive. So these individuals are not old enough to have children. Yellow is reproductive age. And then we have post-reproductive age. We always see that males are on, ooh, let me think. I have to think about this one for a minute. So we always see that males are here on the left and females are going to be on the right. That's why there's a line down the middle. And so you might see that some males might be a little bit smaller if like there was a war and the men went off to war. And so if sometimes if these are bigger, you'll actually have specific age groups. These ones are just color coded. So here we see that they're about the same. Okay, so we have large numbers of babies that are and young people that are being born. Look at how broad my base is. Well, that would make sense because my birth rate is high. My death rate is also kind of high. Okay, and then it gets smaller as we move up. It's a pre-industrial society. They have really probably a short life expectancy. And so this pyramid here tells me that there's lots of babies being born, but also lots of deaths, and it's probably a developing country. This country is in stage two. So this one is telling me that the population has the potential to grow. This one, my population is growing really big. Notice that there's not nearly as much death. So that means that they, like how horizontal, like how far out they come is relatively even. The base isn't significantly larger than the top of the pyramid. So here my death rate is starting to fall, but my birth rate is staying relatively high. And so we're growing, but we're not growing nearly the rate as before. And so really what we'll see is that this population probably better goes with stage two, and this one probably goes with stage three, and this one is actually stage four. And then here is the stage five that we don't really see in our photo. But in our stable population pyramid, we see that the base is relatively the same as the top. This one has a lot of population momentum. Oh, I don't want to play this video. Hold on. So this one has population momentum, meaning that as the base were to get older, they're going to have babies, and that's going to cause the population to grow even more. This one probably does not have as much momentum because its base isn't as big. In this one, we've reached this zero population growth, and the population is no longer growing. It's stable. And in this one, our birth rate is falling below our death rate, and that's bad. See how many people have to be supported here, and then not as many people are working or paying into the economy or providing jobs, and that's bad. Okay, so age structure diagrams just tell us the percentage of males and females in the young, middle, or older category. We see pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive. A country with a large percentage of people younger than 15 will experience rapid population growth. And so an aging population is equally as bad. And so we've talked about that. And that's because they threaten economic growth. There's labor shortages. There's less money coming in taxes because there's not as many people buying stuff, less business formation, less technology development, pensions. If there's less people paying in, we can't pay as much out like Social Security. And so that's always something that we need to consider. Okay, so we want our population to be slow growing or stable. So, how do we get there? We don't want it to be increasing and we don't want it to be negative. We want it to be like Goldilocks, just right. So, how do we get there? Well, there's a couple of ways. We need to empower women. Women have fewer children if they're educated, they're able to have an income, and they have rights. And I'm talking about like the right to decide if they want to go on birth control. All these rights that we take for granted in the United States of America that aren't present. In lots of other countries, women can't decide to go on birth control. Their husband may come home and say, hey, tonight we're going to have marital relations, and the woman doesn't really have a choice in that nature. Her mother-in-law probably lives with her, and so her mother-in-law can be very controlling and saying like you need to have more grandchildren, and that is something that she doesn't really have the option of saying no towards. And I know you guys are all going to laugh and whatever, but it's not really funny. If you've already have 4 or 5 kids and you don't have any money and you don't want to have any more children, but you don't really have that option, that's not a good situation to be in. Okay. Because in most countries, including the United States, but definitely in other countries, most of the women are the ones that do the domestic work and the childcare. They provide unpaid health care, and they don't have as many access to educational opportunities. In lots of countries, women are still not allowed to own businesses, or they're not allowed to own land. And so we see that keeps them on a lower tier in a social status, and therefore they're more likely to have more children. Okay, we want to give access to family planning for children, that for women. That means that we want to reduce unintended pregnancies, and we want women and then young infants to receive health care during that pregnancy and then early on. We want to reduce that infant mortality rate via that the use of vaccines or the access to health care or clean drinking water. For example, when I was in Africa, there was a baby there, and the baby was probably 18 months or 2 years, and it had massive mental retardation because the mom had not developed an adequate milk supply, and they didn't have a clean water supply to make formula. And so that baby didn't receive enough nutrients when it was really little. And so that baby had some developmental delays. Okay. Overall, we see that children in certain countries are given away in marriages at a very young age. So 12, 13, 14, they're married off by their families. And so that obviously is not something that happens in the United States, but contributes to the overall low status of women. And then we don't give them access to contraception or any kind of family planning. Okay. China had a one child policy for a long time. So 1970, there were 790 million people that were facing starvation. The government instituted a one child policy. The growth rate plummeted. And now we've talked about how, in some of the other videos, how that resulted in infanticide and killing female infants. And then there was a black market for trading in girls. And now there's not enough girls to marry all the boys. That policy has been generally restricted. And I think families can now have more than one. But what we've seen is that ultimately it had an impact on their population growth, and they were very successful in lowering that population growth. Okay. And so the human population is growing very rapidly. It's going to bump up on our environmental limits. And so what we need to think about is how can we combine our population growth with our increasing rate of resource use to ensure that all people have access to resources and access to a good quality, high standard of living. Okay. Our current population growth is not sustainable. Our pollution rates and our release of fossil fuel, climate changing gases is very excessive. And so we need to focus on decreasing the human population, reducing and reusing and recycling our materials so that we maintain capital goods, focusing on preserving space, preserving habitat to maintain organisms, to maintain biodiversity. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful for you guys, and we'll touch base in class, and I hope to see you soon.